remember that the domain refers to our x values, and our range refers to our y's. Now when looking at graphs, we know that graphs are created by numerous amounts or a table of values of x and y. Here we have an absolute value graph. We know that it's an absolute value graph because of the V shape that it makes. So let's take a look at our x values. We see there's an x equals 0, an x equals 1, x equals 2, x equals 3, and so on and so forth. Because this has an arrow at the end, we know that the graph continues on. So all values of x that are positive would be part of this range. We notice that with the absolute value graph, we're having a very similar pattern on the other side. We see -1, -2, -3, and again, with an arrow over here, we get the same thing. This goes on forever. So our domain is basically every number. Every number could have a value on this graph if we let the graph continue on. So we will say that it is all real numbers, which we'll write as all real. Here, let's take a look at our y values. Here is our y line. So we're looking for what values our graph has on the y line. Well, we very clearly see where it intercepts here, that we have y equals 2. What about below that? Y equals 1. Here we can see that there's not a part of the graph that shows up. So this would be not be part of the range. What about above the circle we have here? Y equals 3. Well, we see that it does actually go to 2 different points on the graph, but it still goes to a part of the graph. So y equals 3, y equals 4, y equals 5, and so on are all going to be part of the graph. And we know we can keep going up, again, because of these arrows at the end of our graph. Now what we also can see is that there's not going to be anything at y equals 0, -1, and anything below that. There will not be any values there. So when we write our range, we will write it as y is greater than or equal to 2. So again, as we look, we see that y equals 2 is right here, and y equals 2 is part of the graph. So we want to include that, which is why we say greater than or equal to. Y equals 2 is part of the graph, and any number greater than will be in the range. So our domain for this is all real, and our range is y is greater than or equal to 2. So here we have another graph, this time with definite endpoints. We might have to do another review here. Notice that the endpoints don't match. One is a closed circle and one is an open circle. Remember what that meant. We talked about that a while ago with number lines. An open circle means it does not include. So we aren't actually going to include this point of -4, 1. It's where we're ending, but we're going to go right up to it but not include it. A closed circle means to include. So we would include that. So let's take a look at our domain. Again, going along our x, where do we have points? We have points all the way from -4 until +3. We don't have anything lower than that, lower than -4 or higher than +3. So with our domain, we can write this as two domains. We can say that x will be greater than -4, because this is our low number and we're going to go greater. Notice I did not include the equal sign. We're not going to include this -4, and open circle means do not include. But we also know that our domain is going to be less than 3. Will it include the point 3? Yes. So this is a less than or equal to 3. So our domain is written in two parts. It'll be greater than -4, and then it will be less than or equal to 3. Let's do the same thing. Let's take a look at our range. Here's our y line. Remember, range is our y. So we can see here that we don't have a very big range. Our range stops. The highest it goes is this point here. 1, 2, 3, +3. The lowest it goes is this point here, which is +1. But again, we're not including this +1. We're doing everything above it. So again, we'll write it as two ranges. We'll say that x is greater than 1. And again, we're not including the 1 because this is an open circle, which means do not include. We're also going to say that x is less than 3. And again, we have a closed circle, so this is less than or equal to 3. Okay, watch the green point as it follows the line. You will see that it is marking on the right the domain. And you will notice with the domain that it starts at 0, includes 0, and starts heading in the positive direction, but is not marking anything below that. So we'll say that the domain, which is all we're looking at here, would be x is going to be greater than or equal to 0. And we can tell that any number on here can be part of this graph, but it stops at 0, but does, by the closed circle, include 0. Okay, as you are seeing here, we're going to end up with a domain of x is less than 0 and x is greater than 0. And remember, don't include 0. Alright, and here we are looking at a domain which will end up being x is greater than or equal to negative 3, and then it will be x is less than or equal to 3. Here now we're looking at a graph we looked at earlier for range, and again following the green lines you'll see that the pink line on the right is marking only our range, and our range is going from 0, including 0, and moving upwards since our graph is only sitting in the positive area. Range will be, again, y is going to be greater than or equal to 0. That's because it includes 0, but everything it has for it is positive. Okay, as you can see in this case, our range will be y is less than 0 and y is greater than 0. But in this case, we will not include 0. Okay, and here we see that our range will be y is less than or equal to 4, since we are including the point 4. As it continues down, we see that it will be y is greater than or equal to negative 2.